This is a talk about the system of sensing. I originally wrote about the system of sensing in a book called Autism and Sensing the Unlost Instinct, which was published in 1995. The reason why it was packaged as an autism-related book was because we all begin in that system of sensing, a world before mind, where we have a preconscious state that is a state of beingness rather than up there in mind and conscious awareness. And we're yet to accumulate that world of meaning, that dictionary, which then changes how we experience the world. We start to experience it with interpretation, with interpreting rather than sensing it. And then after that we gain all the indoctrination and inheritance of culture and ego, etc., and all the cladding, and then that changes how mind experiences it. And so it's a progressive level of change in how we experience the world. But as a person who grew up meaning deaf and meaning blind until late childhood, when I gained language with meaning, and until my 20s when I got cohesive visual perception, I retained a lot of that early capacity to navigate my world by pattern and theme and feel. And so I want to talk a little bit about what that system is, how we've all come from it, how some people lose it, and why it's a good thing to get it back. So the system of sensing is our first world. And in our first world, we're really in our own world. It's this place where we accumulate huge amounts of experiences, sensory experiences, emotional waves, tones, movement, textures, smells, sounds, colours, patterns. We're both sensing this stuff, we are intuiting this stuff, we are experiencing it by merging with it. We become part of the music. We feel the music inside of us. We become part of that texture until we can't feel the separateness of ourselves and that texture. We're wrapped up in that texture. We experience the colours, but we move through the colours, and the colours feel like they're moving through us. We meet, we encounter people, but we experience them like a kind of living music, like this music of beingness that has a different shape, in a sense, each one. And their shape changes how we experience it. So it's not yet a world of self and other. It's a world of self in other and other in self. And it's not a world of imitating. It's a world of merging in order to know something as the basic sensory and emotional experience of what we're merging with. So we are these experience machines in a sense, and it's not yet a place where we consciously think about things. We're getting such a soup of sensory and emotional information. There isn't those structures yet with which to interpret and gain conscious awareness. So we're in a very pre-conscious state, and we're taking in far more than we can actually consciously process. And this is building up those maps, the repertoire, the dictionaries, in those connections in the brain that have not yet been made. And as such, because we haven't got all those connections made, there's nothing to filter what's coming in. And so we get overwhelmed, and we contract, and we scream, and we look away, and we cry, or we space out, or we dissociate, or however we manage that, which I guess you could say is a bit autistic, a bit autistic, and therefore we all have this autistic response to the world. And some people continue to have that, and others make enough connections in their brain that they begin to filter what's coming in, and they thereby cut down on a large amount of what's coming in, and they build their repertoires so that everything that's coming in progressively is coming in with meaning and it's manageable, and then we call those people less autistic. But because we're getting flooded with information and we haven't yet got those structures to filter this stuff, what happens with all that accumulated information is that it sort of sits within us. And if somebody was to, like as we get older and they try to tap into that directly, we might not feel we have that knowledge, that conscious awareness, and therefore we can't respond. But if they do something that maybe isn't what we expect, or they address somebody else, we might find that this unknown knowing suddenly comes through, and it surprises us. It surprises us because we didn't consciously know that we had any of that understanding, that we'd done anything with that knowing. But it's unknown knowing because it came in without the filtering, and it was being processed back there in that preconscious state, not in the conscious state, not in mind, what we know of as conscious mind. The preconscious state is really more, I guess, body. It's more like body-brain rather than mind. And so then if we can progressively talk about how we move out of this state of mergence, this state of beingness, this state of sensing, this place of unknown knowing, this my world, what is our next stage, if you like. And our next stage is really that we move into being a sensory being in interaction with the external world. We're taking our my world and we're playing with the external world and taking this back and forth into our own world. So what is the external world? Is it, happy birthday, blow out the candles, or aren't you a pretty boy? Oh, look, he's smiling, or whatever. Is it that world of cladding? Because no, the external world as a sensory world is not all that cladding. That's not what it is. And if you bring all that in too early, the person is not yet ready for it. And I'm not sure that we should necessarily be too ready for it, and certainly not too soon. And we're progressively building a society where we pathologize anybody who's not, straight up for all the cladding by the time they're 2 or 3 years old. But that is, in my opinion, a huge ignorance of the process, of the natural process of how human beings mature from their my world into the external world, into the world of mind, and then, if necessary and where necessary, that world of cladding and ego. So let's talk about the external world. When I moved out of this place of purely pattern, theme and feel, when I was moving out of a place of merging and self in others and others in self, where to know something you resonated with it and you felt it within you. And I moved out of this into a place where part of me was now incarnated, if you like, quite in the body. And so there was beginning to be, if you like, this separateness between the my world and the external world, a dialogue, an interplay, and a transition, but a progressive separateness. And this meant I would get up inside of the tree. I didn't stand outside the tree. I didn't yet have enough of that, self and other separateness to stand outside of the tree and experience the tree. I got inside the tree to feel as the tree and putting my face into, the blossoms and of this lemon tree and the buzz of the bees around me and the warmth of the sky and the light that was coming through these shaded green leaves. And it was like a symphony. I felt I was swept up in this symphony of this experience of this thing. And I didn't have a word of trees. I didn't have words like bees or blossoms. Those concepts were not existing. These were sensory experiences, and the emotional reaction that they brought out in me of joy and connection. And I'd get this from wallpaper books, and I'd get this from carpet, and I'd get this from the sparkles in the air, and I'd get this from birds fluttering inside of a bird aviary I'd climbed into, and I'd get this from the sound of gravel under my feet. I think that when we see children who are living like that, we tend to think, either, they're like a fairy, or, are they autistic? Because they have not yet moved into that world of mind and meaning. But this is actually a very normal transition, and we all grow at very different rates, and it's okay not to fast track. It's okay for people to retain awareness of what those stages are. Even if we call it delayed development, we shouldn't be pathologizing it, going to war against it. We should be working with it, understanding it is a natural trajectory. There may be reasons why that progress is blocked, and it's our job to navigate those blockages and find, what works for that person. In my case, I was severely face blind. I had a severe language processing disorder, and I saw my world in bits, so I couldn't gain visual meaning. I couldn't simultaneously process the self and other thing until I was in my 30s. I'd get one, lose the other, get the other, lose that. But I learned to navigate regardless, and if we learn to work with it as diversity, then you can learn to navigate. It's just when we take this one-size-fits-all idea of normality and impose it on every possible human child, then we get this crazed desperation to make sure that everyone's developing at exactly the same pace. And, and we want it to be escalated, and we want it to be the best. But according to what? According to the ego world, the world of cladding? That's a later world. It's just one of many worlds that we transition through. And it's not always necessary. And sometimes it's very damaging. We have a lot of mental health issues that come from the fact that that world has been incredibly damaging to people, and that's worth acknowledging too. And we're progressively getting more and more of those in very young children. Okay, so the external world is a place of sensory experiences. We experience it through our bodies and our brains as sensations, thoughts, emotions, connections. It's a hands-on world. Let me say that again, it's a hands-on world, where sensing and beingness are still relatively strongly intact. So if we make it all about look, listen, learn, we're not allowing people to go from the beingness into the doing through their bodies and learning through their bodies. That connection between body and mind. Think about how many people you've ever hugged and how many of them have actually been in their body. How many will feel their world, physically feel their world? They'll look, they'll listen, but will they touch anything? Will they really get into that, or are they tentative and very unsure and unable to really experience that world through their bodies, or they've left that behind? or they've been taught don't touch, don't touch, don't touch, don't touch. But we need to make it possible that children who are in that stage are able to make that transition from merging with things that they are resonating with in body, moving into a hands-on experience through body and through all the senses, before they get to this place of look, listen, mind. And otherwise we extinguish some of the real depth of connection with the external world and with others. And with that, I think, is some of that place of empathy where we feel it in our bodies, and we shouldn't extinguish that, and definitely not extinguish it too early in creating what perhaps, can look like a zombie world. Okay, so the next world is the world of interpreting. It's the interpretive world. It's a world of applied meaning to incoming experiences. And this progressively builds up these mental structures, these frameworks, and ultimately these filter the direct sensed experiences of the physical world. And it's through this that we develop conscious mind as our guide. So we look at something and, for me, I might look at, this, and I might say, I might experience it as having a certain voice, which is that sound. I'll experience it as having a certain movement or capacity to create sensations. I might find that it catches light in a certain way. So I can explore it as a sensory collection. And perhaps I want to take dust off something, and perhaps I find that, it does that. But I don't necessarily block out everything else it could be by seeing brush. But once I am taught that it is a brush and only brush, what are you doing? What are you doing? It's a brush. Put it down, it's a brush. That's not your brush. Whatever. It's a brush. It's for painting, okay? Then we close out all the other ways that we can see and experience something. And it doesn't matter whether it's a brush or whether it's a room or whether it's the cat or whether it's, your partner or whether it's the sky or whatever it is. When we box it and we set it in stone, we reduce the range of ways we can experience it. So when I look at a sky, for example, I feel I can expand. My body feels like it can expand up into that space, or my beingness can expand up into that space. When I experience the sky, I experience it as something that's covering me, and it's full of, it's got twinkles and bits of light, and it's like a cover over the earth. When I experience the sky, it's a moving through, which is so very different to, things that are like directly on the ground, So if we just say, oh, that's the sky, we kind of box all that stuff up. If we say, that's your cat, well, is it my cat? Because I experienced cat as a fush, 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 something that was pattable and velvety, fush. And it was the same experience as hair, which I don't have. Velvet, fur. I experienced cat as brrrk, which meant fur moving fast on legs. And so if we go, oh yeah, that's the cat, do we capture that? I experience this creature that gets called the cat as another person, as an entity that is capable of language in interaction with me. And you know, the cat shows me what it needs and what it feels, and sometimes it's on my terms, sometimes on cat's terms. My cat, is it my cat? Does the cat belong to itself? Do we have a belonging with or a belonging to? So we get all this boxed thing that starts to dictate a one-size-fits-all or a much more constricted version of everything we see and experience. And I guess this allows us to get this conscious mind so that when people ask us a question, we've got stored stuff and we can come out with it. We can retrieve it and we like that because the person's not coming from unknown knowing. They're not letting out stuff that's unfiltered, that's uncensored. And so we find it a tidier world, a world that is less autistic. It's more managed. It's more acceptable. It's more sculpted, perhaps. And this conscious mind, because it's a reduced thing compared to the vastness of the preconscious state. So what happens is that we now have these structures. Information has got to get through the conscious mind, and it filters out a lot of stuff that it sees as relevant or which does not compute. Let's say it is transgender and you have an idea of male, female. Okay, this does not compute. So, and we have a lot of stuff like that where people cannot expand their thinking. They cannot really take in the vast diversity of perspectives and experiences, and they can't see them as different but equal because they've got this boxed mindedness that says this is how it is. And yet, reality is far vaster. And so this mind thing also creates division between us. And it gets further divided as we move into the ego world and inherited culture and indoctrination and so forth. The interpretive world is perhaps useful. It's useful because it gives us a shorthand of communicating, shared languages, literal logical state. And it also filters information so we're not overloading all the time. We're not having meltdowns and looking autistic. So people like that. They find that tidy, and they find it less dysfunctional. They find it less less of a pathology. And you have to ask yourself, well, who makes these? Who makes these ideas? Where is this decision of what's normal, what's whatever coming from? And where it's coming from is the next world. So once you have enough learning and language, receptive language, expressive language, be that through typing, be that through speaking, whatever it is that you're using to do that interpretive conscious mind of meaning, boxness, whatever, then you have this extra cladding, which is the ego world. But it's more than just ego, as in, a basic sense of I. The ego contortion it further clads and it alters and it filters the logical meaning that we get from experiences of the physical world. So it alters what mind would logically make of a situation or an experience. And by doing this, it further buries all of that original capacity for sensing and for beingness. So our original, really connected, quite core self is so buried under these layers. We haven't seen it for a long time. And when it comes out slightly, what we have is people correcting because they're living by mind. But now they're correcting in terms of ego and culture, indoctrination, economics, identifications, rewards, honed addictions, competition for social and economic and cultural currency. Oh, don't do that. People will think this. Don't do that. Everyone will respond to you like that. Only this type of person would do this. You want to be popular, don't you? You want to fit in. Don't you want what everybody else would want? But we're all different. We're rebelling. Well, sure, we're all rebelling in the same kind of way. We're all buying our conformist nonconformity from the same shop, so to speak. This ego world is part of where we get, for example, politics, and people who are running the countries are coming from different ego packages that this group of people subscribe to or this group of people subscribe to. And yet these leaders are meant to represent on behalf of all people. But we don't choose them on the basis of even having any understanding of what that ego world is, so that they therefore have some objectivity outside of their cladding subjectivity. We don't choose them for that. We choose them for did we think that they were attractive enough in terms of these standards? Did they say all the right things in terms of this? Did they make us laugh? Did they dot the I's and cross the T's on a certain little cultural package thing that people found themselves indoctrinated into, identifying with, and therefore invested in. But I think that if we're going to choose leaders, we should actually choose leaders who are aware of what these different stages are, and that the cladding actually removes them from the clarity of mind. That the constant reliance on just logic and mind and meaning removes them from the capacity to actually directly and without judgment sensually experience and take in and empathize within that external world. And that if they're living in this world of cladding, where they're not really even there. They are so far removed from their original place, their original beingness, their capacity to sense, their capacity to understand self in others and others in self, their capacity to know something as what it is, without the impositions of defining, without the impositions of judging or contorting or measuring. And these are the people that we should have representing vast swathes of people, or representing countries within what should be a whole and united world of living things and the non-living things that they interact with, whether that's the trees, whether that's the environment, whether that's the weather, whether that's animals, whether that's fellow human beings. But because people are indoctrinated into this idea that the ego world is somehow natural and somehow absolutely necessary and somehow a higher state, then we don't look at it that way. We have people who are working with minds, in schools, and instead of appreciating and respecting the hands-on and sensory beingness world that is natural to children, they're very fast in trying to get them straight up into mind, meaning, think, look, listen, learn, because they're on their way to ensuring that they have a secure place within the ego world. And I think that teachers need to nurture the wholeness of the human being and encourage them not to forget and not to undervalue and not leave by the roadside that essential core self that they came from. In that world of cladding, it's so overwhelming. You should be this, you should be that, you shouldn't be this, you should be that, until people have a face for everything and everything for a face. Or they have a one-size-fits-all and they're not even in there. So sometimes you see moments of them being in there. Sometimes you'll see some people who have managed to retain themselves as a cohesive human being, who have that core self within there, and it's a really wonderful thing to connect with. But you have a lot of you have people who are coming from that, and they knock up against someone who is just living in mind, has lost all of that beingness. Or you have the person who's just living in the logical mind, interpreting, who is constantly knocking up against the world of the ego-clad people who just see this as aspie. And I just think that if we have better awareness of these systems, and that it's a process, and that once we get to that stage of cladding, we don't have to fully buy it. We don't have to fully identify with it or be fully and forever indoctrinated into it. We can question it. We can question our place within it. We are flexible human beings. We have the capacity to actually make our own lives. We have our capacity to close off, to close out, to look back, to look in, to return, to regain, to reconnect. As long as we have some sense, some map of what that actually means. And it's hard to remember and value that map when it's been so denigrated, so judged, so cast aside, made so redundant, and associated with disability or associated with pathology. So my hope is that the world will become less zombied and more present and more diverse and more aware of and embracing of that diversity, knowing that we all come from very different music of beingness right from the start, and that the cladding is really only cladding. It's just clothes, and we can step out of them, and that mind is just a structure, and we don't have to be a slave to that structure, and that the external world is actually at its very core a sensory world, and it is there to be experienced and engaged with, respectfully. And when I mean respectfully, I mean if you sense the nature of something, you don't just rip it off and grab it and me and mine. That's the world of ego. You interact with it with that sense of self in others and others in self. And if people could have any idea of what that world is like, and that it's not a going through the motions, it's not a facade, it's not one more piece of cladding, it's not how to look intact, it's a place of realness, and it is our home. It's the home we each came from. It's the home of the soul, and I hope that you find it.